Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. I love playing the Vienna Gambit with white as it is not only fun, but can often result in a major advantage for white after the opening moves. At least that is often the case when playing as a noob at the beginner intermediate level of around 1200. Yesterday I played 2 games back to back where in response to my Vienna Gambit, the opponent declined the gambit with pawn to d6. I lost the first game due to an egregious blunder, but was successful in the second. This is a good opportunity to explore how the game progresses to this response. So let's have a quick look at the review for the first game. Now, interesting with both games, I played opponents from South America, the first from Uruguay. Now, in this game, reasonably balanced. The opponent makes a blunder. I have major advantage. I immediately blunder back, and it's a mate-in-one blunder, and I lose the game. Nonetheless, I think it gives some good principles about this particular opening. So let's look at analysis. There we go. And as a reminder, the Vienna Gambit starts with e4, e5, knight to c3. Opponent plays knight to f6, and then we play f4. And as a bit of revision, I suppose, black should absolutely not take that gambited pawn. If they do, only badness awaits. Only badness awaits, because with pawn forward to attack the knight on f6, it now has no good escape squares other than to undevelop to g8. And if you look at sort of the analysis line, g8 is in fact the best move for black. It's not uncommon that opponents will try to pin the pawn by moving the queen to e7, but that's a terrible move. You can respond simply by moving the queen back, and pretty much the opponent, black has lost the game by this point. Now, if the opponent retreats back to g8, which is their best move, the response for white is to develop the other knight to g3. And at this point, white has a very, very substantial lead in development compared to black. And at a certain point in time, this pawn is generally fairly easy to recapture. So for instance, developing the pawn to d4 now opens up an attack back by the bishop. Now, in this case, of course, the opponent doesn't take the gambit, but declines the gambit with pawn to d6. And the question is this actually a good way to decline the gambit? Now, as we see, this actually leads to some problems for black, which will become obvious over the course of these 2 games. Now, here I decide to develop my bishop first, and then the black developed their other knight. Now, I note that the computer analysis suggested that this was not a good move, and the reason for that, and I didn't actually see it in this game because I do the same thing with the second game, is that black can capture the pawn, and that sort of invites white to capture back, but then black can then potentially fork the 2 pieces. So that's potentially a problem for white. Rightio. So let's take off self-analysis. So here I didn't do that, but also the opponent didn't punish me either. I set up my chain of pawns. The opponent moves their bishop to g4 with an attack, but this is usually fairly easily met by just simply developing the other knight. It's very common for the opponent then to bring the other knight forward, seemingly attacking the knight with 2 pieces, but this allows us to castle, and we continue playing chess. And white is generally pretty much okay here, and potentially with a better position and lead in development. Computer thinks it's fairly equal, but I think it's much easier to play this position as white than for black. So the opponent captures with the bishop, capture back, And here I move my pawn forward. So now with a chain of connect 4. The computer suggests breaking open the center is better. However, in these positions, I tend to like to try to attack king side. Now this king seemingly is exposed, but you can just move the king out of the way, and now that file is potentially open for the queen or for the rook. Opponent pushes their own G pawn forward to G6. My goal here is trying to get rid of the defenders. That's fine with me. Happy to retreat. Opponent pushes their pawn again. And here my logic is that I have a potential fork of the rook and the pawn. Opponent pushes their bishop forward. That's fine. Captures. That just allows me to move the king to the side. The opponent now moves the bishop, the rook, but the bishop captures the pawn as originally planned. Captures. I capture now the other knight as well, and basically I've captured most of the active pieces of black. So again, even though it looks fairly equal, I think I'm in a somewhat better position here than black. The opponent does a major blunder by moving their queen out. And here I make my blunder, a mate-in-one blunder. Now, I was so focused on the attack on the G1 square, thinking that this was actually just not possible by black. So even though it looks like they've got potential three attackers, 1, 2, 3, I thought, look, I've got 4 defenders, so I'm pretty much okay, including the defender, including the king as the final defender as well. So I thought I was pretty much just a-okay here, and I missed the completely obvious thing that, of course, the queen doesn't have to go to G1. The queen could go to G2, and that is checkmate as well. So I completely missed that because I was just had sort of tunnel vision and looking at G1. So in this position, rather than making the obvious move of moving the rook to G1, which is potentially quite strong because the opponent cannot move the queen out of the way without risking, so check, and then capturing of the second rook as well. I blundered a move by capturing the opponent's bishop, and of course I was immediately punished. A good game. Opponent played well, and the opponent definitely should capitalize on my silly mistakes. However, as you could see, prior to that very silly move of my own, I had a reasonably strong attack down the king side. Now let's have a look at the next game. All right, so in this game, I played another player from South America, this time from Argentina. Quick look at the review. In this game, a relatively flat and then winning chances at the end. I played this game relatively well, no mistakes or blunders, higher level of accuracy than the opponent. Let's have a look at the analysis. All right, so again, the Vienna Gambit, so e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, and f4. And as per sort of the question, is it good to decline the gambit with d6? Opponent plays d6. Now I played this game rather more carefully after just completely just blundered that last game. I was in a pretty good position and then just wasn't thinking straight. I sort of moved the bishop again, and so in the future, the developing a knight first is the better move. The chain, developed a knight, castles. All right, so again, the goal here is to launch a potential kingside attack and try to get rid of some of the defenders in and around the king. So now, firstly, the opponent looks like they were trying to launch a queenside attack. So with a6 and presumably then b5, attacking the bishop. Now that can be pretty much refuted just with pawn to a4. So that no longer works as the rook is hanging. So that basically just shuts that down, which is good. Opponent develops their knight to c6. I now advance my knight because I'm trying to get rid of some of the defenders around the king, just like in the other game. And just like in the other game, that we see the theme of moving the bishop to d4, attacking that knight. Now, in this situation, now that I've already got the chain, I can advance the pawn to f5, pretty much now trapping that bishop. So that bishop is not going to last very long in that position. Opponent develops their knight, again similar to the other game, but this knight is defended pretty much by queen, rook, and pawn. So this is completely okay. Now I'm asking the question, what are you going to do with the bishop? And that really forces, I think, the move to capture, which is fine, because then I capture back with the pawn. The G file is now open. So once I move the king out of the way, either the queen or the rook will have control of that file, or giving an attack on the king. Opponent now decides to sacrifice their other knight by knight captures knight. That is perfectly okay with me. I still have the bishop pair, and basically now there is one less defender in around the king. Excellent. The opponent now attacks my bishop. Given that I've already moved the pawn to a4, I've now got a nice safe square on a2 for the bishop to retreat to. Staying on this diagonal is important, as it puts pressure on that pawn and also potentially pins it to the king. This will become important later in the game, as we shall see. Opponent pushes the pawn forward. I now kick their knight out of the way. So this knight pretty much has no good places to go. That's useful for them. So in most of these positions, it's defended, and the knight will be lost. In fact, the only safe square for the knight to retreat to is back to c6. Which is excellent because that is on the wrong side of the board. I'm trying to attack down the king side, and that just moves it out of the way. So I'm very happy with that. I move my king to prepare for the attack. The opponent moves their bishop out. I was fine with that. So captures. The opponent will either capture with the pawn or the queen. If they do that, that weakens the defense. With the queen, I think I have enough attackers here that I should be okay. So queen takes, rook there. Queen has to move to the side. Need to, of course, protect that pawn, and also getting the queen ready for lining up on the G file. The opponent now makes a non-move, really. That pretty much achieves nothing. Here I've lined up the battery of the king and the rook, so that is checkmate unless the opponent does something. And with the bishop and with the pawn there, this is really strong. If they try to advance forward, it captures. So this is looking really good. The opponent now sort of offers a queen trade. And here I was trying to think. I didn't want to trade queens. I thought it would be easier to win with a queen. Obviously here, doing a queen trade is probably advantageous to me. However, I just wanted to hold on to my queen. So I decided to basically gambit the H pawn. So if I lost that pawn, got rid of that pawn, that actually opens up both files. Now that's, of course, there's a pretty big risk with that, but I thought that I had the winning chances here. So I gambit that pawn. They capture. And here, again, offering the queen trade. However, I think the psychology here is that I think that the opponent wasn't going to trade queens. And if they weren't going to trade queens, then they had to move the queen somewhere else. And there just weren't very good squares for the queen to move to. So, and I was correct. The opponent opted not to trade queens. They decided to try to protect that queen, and that was actually a mistake. And I suppose this is the difference between playing a human and a computer. A computer would have just been, wouldn't have sentiment attached to it, while I think humans just attach a lot of material sentimentality. And even though that was their best move, that sort of justified my gambiting of that pawn. Clearly, that was objectively a bad move, but effectively, it gave me this opportunity. Now, this is a serious problem for the opponent because I think they don't recognize a number of things which are potentially pinned, including the fact that this pawn doesn't defend that square because it is pinned by the bishop. And it's a long diagonal, easy to miss. That allows for rook to move up to g6, attacking the queen. And again, as part of the sentimentality with wanting to hold on to material, it just wasn't very likely that the opponent would accept the move queen takes rook. I thought they were going to move their queen once again out of the way, moving it away from the defense of the king, and that basically now leads to unavoidable checkmate, because this pawn is also pinned to the king, which means this pawn does not defend that square either. So this pawn does not defend that square, this pawn does not defend that square due to these pins. That allows queen to take. The opponent could potentially delay the agony by giving some spike checks effectively. They just make a random move. I've got two ways to checkmate, either rook takes or queen takes. They're both checkmate. In this case, I took with queen. I was very happy with that game. So that's sort of a massive sort of kingside attack with these abilities to create pins. And it's just a potentially quite a powerful system. And I think in terms of the question whether using d6 as a way of declining the gambit, the Vienna Gambit, the answer is no. It is not a good way of declining the gambit. Although declining the Vienna Gambit with d6 isn't disastrous for black, it also isn't good. As these two games show, white has good opportunities for a strong kingside attack in the mid-game. If black castles kingside, this gives good opportunities for white to win. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.